Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the panel discussion titled Institutionalizing the Quad, Can It Seize the Momentum for the Future?, which is jointly organized by the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Japan. Before we proceed with the event, I would appreciate it if everyone could mute their microphones throughout the session. If you have any questions or feedback to share, please forward them via the Zoom chat. The questions will be consolidated for the panelists to answer. This afternoon, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Kei Koga, Assistant Professor, Public Policy and Global Affairs Program, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore; Dr. Lavina Lee, Senior Lecturer, Department of Modern History, Politics and International Relations, Macquarie University, Australia; Dr. Jagannath Panda, Research Fellow and Coordinator of East Asia Center, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, India. The panel discussion will be chaired by Mr. Ippeita Nishida, Senior Research Fellow, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Japan. I now invite Mr. Nishida to chair the discussion. Mr. Nishida, please.
Well, thank you very much, Nishad. And thank you very much, all of you, for taking time for this seminar. And I would particularly want to express my sincere gratitude to Professor Raja Mohan and his team at the ISAS for joint work the second time. Now, today we're going to talk about institutionalizing the Quad. Can it seize the momentum for the future? We are very glad to have distinguished speakers on this theme, Dr. Lee, Dr. Panda, and Dr. Koga. And we are having a quite large audience, not just from Asia, but also from Europe and the US. So we are very much interested to see how we can unfold the discussion. So on today's central theme, the institutionalization of the Quad, some people call it the Quad 2.0, as the Quadrilateral Security Talk has reinvigorated from 2017, and many has been observing it as a natural response to China's aggressive military activities and excessive assertiveness, but also the Trump administration's keen interest in realigning US engagement in this Indo-Pacific region. So the two concepts, the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, are they're very strong, and we see how it goes. Now, under this, we have seen much progress. The four militaries have increased the frequency and intensity of the joint military exercises in bilateral and multilateral format. Most notably, the Australia's inclusion in the November 2020 Malabar exercise was a highlight. Also in the political process, the Quad Foreign Ministers Agreement to hold Foreign Minister talk annually was a big success. So we are seeing actual institutionalized process of the Quad to happen. Yet we are also knowing that there are differences in the interests and the priorities of each countries. For example, at one end, we have seen a very hardliner like Mark Pompeo, who wants to have Asian NATO type coalition, while others may not be such definitive and may want to keep such the current loose format of alignments. And we think that each administration in the Quad positions itself somewhere in between, given such parameters like political and economic relationship with China, domestic support, and social legal constraints, consistency with other regional policies and engagement, and in particular with those of the Quad plus candidates in the region. Now, we are also aware that the Biden administration from this very tonight, is likely to take more internationalist approach, but we are not very sure yet to what extent Biden administration is to carry the Trump's legacy. What we know certainly now is that given the domestic pressure with the COVID, the US expectation for the burden sharing by the allied and security partner is quite high. So the central questions to ask in this panel today is threefold. The first is this the momentum created by the latest administrations of Trump, also Abe, Is it a real momentum for making a stronger security alignment, or is it just a transitory one? The second one is how will the Quad balance the relationship with China and ASEAN countries who doesn't want to be entrapped in between? And third is how willing are the Quad members willing to align their foreign policy objectives and maintain their commitments in the future. All these depend upon how the four countries conduct this institutional process. So we are very much interested to hearing the experts' voice and perceptions and the insights in this regard. So from here on, I would like to ask each of the panelists, the speakers, to talk initially about the national responses, perspectives from each of the Australia, India, and Japanese point of view. And I would like to ask Lavina first, maybe 10 minutes, if you're okay, and then to follow the Jagannath, and then Kei. And later we're going to do some small exchanges and then open the floor to the audience. So please, Lavina, start.
Okay. Thank you, Ippeita, for the great introduction and for moderating today, the ISAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting me to participate in this panel. I've been asked to share my views representing the Australian position, whether the recent momentum on increasing the level of institutionalization of the Quad is a transitory phenomenon or something that will continue and transform it from a loose coalition of the willing. A key factor in assessing these trends is to evaluate the level of commitment of each country, particularly in the face of pushback from Beijing. A fear of reprisal or punishment by China, particularly a loss of economic opportunities, was an important reason why the newly elected Rudd government withdrew Australia from the Quadrilateral Security Initiative back in February of 2008. The fact that China was Australia's major trading partner had a strong influence over the government's cost-benefit calculations about participation in the Quad. Another key factor was China's own behavior. In 2008, there were still hopes that China would be absorbed within the existing US-led order and that its rise would be peaceful. Many of you will have been following the sharply deteriorating relationship between Canberra and Beijing over the course of 2020. This began last April after Australia was one of the first countries to call for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19, the management of the pandemic by the WHO, and by implication, the management of the pandemic by the Chinese government. Since then, Australia has been the direct target of Beijing's wolf warrior diplomacy, with the first threats of economic coercion coming shortly thereafter. These were not empty threats. From May to August 2020, China imposed tariffs on Australian barley, opened an investigation on Australian wine, and beef exports from 5 abattoirs were suspended. By December 2020, 13 Australian industries were targeted. According to a report by Future Directions International, this has included formal and informal trade barriers on 8 agricultural commodities valued at around 6 billion Australian dollars. Beijing has also formally banned $14 billion worth of Australian coal exports. Given that China accounts for 26% of Australia's total trade, worth around 150 billion US dollars in 2018 to 19, and is the single biggest market for Australian exports, such as coal, iron ore, wine, beef, tourism, and education, many of you will be wondering whether Australia's enthusiasm for the Quad will surely wane. China has certainly raised the costs for Australia, for countering Chinese policies and strategies. Beijing has helpfully made clear what it wants from Australia to end its economic coercion, with its embassy to Australia issuing a list of 14 demands in November 2020. Of these demands, around 10 refer to domestic policy decisions. These include decisions made to block foreign investment by some Chinese companies on national security grounds, banning Huawei and ZTE from the rollout of Australia's 5G network, enactment of foreign interference legislation, and foreign interference investigations involving Chinese nationals by our security agencies. The list also includes complaints about critical reporting of Chinese policies by Australian media organisations and critical commentary by politicians, all of which are impossible for the Australian government to curb without changing the open and democratic nature of Australian society and political institutions against the will of its own people. The offending foreign policy decisions include Australian criticism of human rights violations in Xinjiang, support for democracy in Hong Kong, as well as support for Taiwan, calling for an independent inquiry into COVID-19, and being the first non-literal country to make a statement on the South China Sea to the United Nations. All of these decisions involve Australia's defence and support for a liberal rules-based order. Whilst the sustained campaign of economic coercion has caused some in the Australian business community to question the Australian government's policy direction, as China would have wanted, the Australian government has been clear that these policy positions are non-negotiable, either as sovereign domestic decisions that should not face outside interference of this kind, or as decisions taken in Australia's national interests internationally. Domestically, China's economic coercion and the list of 14 grievances has had the effect of turning the population against the CCP, which has been exposed as a neighbourhood bully and one who views the world hierarchically. For the Australian government, it has confirmed that Australian policy has been based on correct assumptions, that China is not committed to a rules-based order, but is and will continue to use its economic and military power for geostrategic and political ends, and impose a hierarchical order in the region if it is able to do so. If anything, Australia is even more committed to closer quadrilateral cooperation for four main reasons. First, as a grouping containing the four countries most capable and committed to countering Chinese policies and activities that undermine a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Second, because the Quad supports and institutionalizes the continuing presence and commitment of the United States to our region and plays a strong part in extending US preeminence. Third, the Quad gives Australia as a middle power more options and greater leverage to counter, deter, and withstand Chinese coercion and maintain an independent foreign policy. Fourth, because the Quad encourages India as the preeminent resident Indian Ocean power to take a greater role as a security provider in that region. After all, Australia is also an Indian Ocean power. To conclude, Australia understands that it needs allies and partners to counter Chinese activities that most challenge a rules-based order, whether that be military cooperation to develop a stronger deterrent force in concert with others, standard setting in areas of high technology, harmonizing domestic laws on foreign investment, dual-use technologies, and foreign interference, providing economic alternatives for other countries to ensure that they are able to exercise an independent foreign policy, and developing resilient supply chains in critical areas of economic activity with other friendly, trustworthy nations who play by the rules. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lavina Lee, for the great presentation from the Australian perspectives. I think we are very witnessing the changes of the attitude of the Australian government and the citizens toward the China's actions. So very glad to hear those momentum in change. Thank you. So I would like to pass the floor to Jagannath from the Indian perspective. Are you okay?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ippeita-san. Good morning, all. And it's a pleasure to be here in this ISS and Sasakawa Peace Foundation panel. Good to be here with Kei and Lavina. Let me share my thoughts from an Indian perspective. This is probably not the Indian perspective, but definitely this is the dominant thinking in India, in Delhi, that is coming as far as Quad and China is concerned. And I think I'll start with this point that I think last 1 year, particularly the post-pandemic period, has helped India to review its strategic thinking in a lot many ways, particularly factoring China and Indo-Pacific undercurrents. And to that effect, we do see that Indian approach towards Quad, India's approach towards China, India's approach towards a range of countries in the region, including Indo-Pacific, is constantly evolving. And therefore, if we try to understand from an Indian point of view, I think Indian foreign policy has always been shaped through a strategic autonomy and multi-aligned framework. But I think the Galwan incident with China, the recent border tensions with China, has actually helped India to review its own approach towards China, review its relationship with China, and also try to think how India could actually take forward its partnership in the Indo-Pacific. So therefore, if we are really talking about India's approach to Quad, it has to be really based on two correlated factors. One, India's tensions, ongoing tensions and evolving relationship pattern with China. Number two, the strategic advantage that India would like to gain in the process in the Indo-Pacific regions, particularly improving its comprehensive national power status. And as you know, for many countries, improving the comprehensive national power status is one of the dominant aspects of foreign policy decision-making process. And therefore, what we are seeing today is that India's approach towards Quad is very much linked with improving India's power status in the regions. And therefore, Indian foreign policy is taking a slight adjustment from making some changes from a multi-aligned strategy to a pointed alignment strategy. And what is that pointed alignment strategy is all about? The pointed alignment strategy is to focus on expediting or improving India's security and strategic partnership with Quad countries, that is with Japan, with Australia, with US, and also going beyond the Quad formulation, trying to take advantage of the like-minded countries associations, for example, with Vietnam, with South Korea, with Israel, under the what many of us now have started calling it a Quad plus formulations. So therefore, there has been a modification in India's policy approach towards Quad. Initially, what we saw a couple of years back or 2-3 years back, that probably India was unable to give much importance to the Quad. But today, I think India is in a position to give much importance to the Quad, and the relationship with China, the border tensions with China is a strong factor to this effect. Now, what is India's overall approach towards Quad plus, and to the broader Indo-Pacific narrative? And I think from where we are seeing today is that I think India is primarily seeing Quad as a cohesive grouping that is emerging to become institutionalized gradually. And therefore, India would like to take it forward. India do see at this moment that Quad is essentially a coalition or a informal grouping of a democratic countries, 4 democratic countries, which might eventually turn into become a really formalized one. Though so far we have a few ministerial rounds of meetings among the Quad countries, we cannot really call it that everything has been formalized, everything has been institutionalized. I think the process has started, and therefore New Delhi is monitoring each and every development with regard to the Quad quite seriously. The second thing is, I think, why India has started actually giving much more importance to the Quad. Primarily, of course, it's linked with its own tensions with China. But I think what the kind of volume of vigor and power it brings to this grouping, collectively in terms of its economic volume, in terms of its military budgets, in terms of its 4 countries coalitions to build a capacity in the Indo-Pacific, that actually adds to India's foreign policy decision-making process in the Indo-Pacific regions. India is actually investing a lot of projects in the maritime domains, and therefore the Quad countries can actually be helpful to improve all of these maritime projects like cotton projects, spice route projects, Project Mosam Sagar and Mosam. All of these are actually initiatives, and some of them are actually economically driven maritime oriented projects, and Quad countries actually can benefit India, and therefore India do see a context of improving its CNP, comprehensive national power status, by giving much credence to the Quad process. My last 2 points is that whether Quad is really going to be institutionalized and what does really India think about it. I think as Ippeita-san, chair, rightly pointed out, I think there are differences in interest and priorities among all the countries. But again, I think we must keep it in mind that these differences in interest and priorities are very common. Any multilateral groupings we are talking about, there will be different interests and there will be different national priorities. And we should not really see it as an obstacle. And I think what we should be really focusing on is how to sustain the Quad process and giving it a strategic direction. And therefore, I think 3 important issues will be key from India's point of view to promote and establish, one, a kind of purposive partnership among all the Quad countries, all the 4 Quad countries. And I think that will be one of the most important priorities for India, to improve its partnership with Japan, with Australia and US. And I think during the pandemic, all of these 3 relationship with India, all the 3 countries' relationship with India has actually been amplified. With Japan, we have signed AXA. With Australia, we have actually advanced our security and defense partnership. So with the US. So this is one of the aspects India would like to invest in as far as Quad is concerned. The second aspect is, I think India would like to keep it much more open and a pluralistic grouping. We have this tendency of trying to see Quad in a very concrete and narrower context and trying to give it a much more militarized sense. And I think New Delhi, despite of its problems with China, would like to make it a much more open and a pluralistic groupings where we could actually cooperate with other like-minded countries, be it democratic or semi-democratic countries in the regions, including some of the Southeast Asian countries. Third, India would actually like to see Quad as a power promotion groupings in Indo-Pacific. And I think that's the context which is emerging. I have some other points to share. As with Ippeita-san, with chair, I am actually writing a commentary on how to institutionalize Quad. Just my couple of last points, what I will add by saying, I think it also serves to India's purpose and also other Quad countries' purpose, that we should not really overemphasize Quad as a security and military oriented groupings. And I think if we do that, we do a mistake, because we must realize that each of these countries, not only the Quad countries, but the Quad supported countries in Southeast Asia and in Indo-Pacific regions, each one of them are strongly linked with China. Now, how to institutionalize the Quad process then? And I think there are 2 ways to institutionalize the Quad process as far as I from Delhi do see taking forward the Quad process. One, there is a hard process attached to it. We need to build consensus on the land and maritime disputes. We need to build consensus on boundary disputes that India is having with China and few other countries are having on the maritime domains. We need to build consensus on how to protect maritime global commons, like invest on the blue economy, fishery, marine ecology, all of these issues. We need to enhance security partnership. We need to also promote, security and military partnership, keeping in mind the information technological aspects. But I think the key aspect to institutionalize the Quad would be how to bring the soft-oriented issues into the Quad groupings. And I think none of the Quad countries have actually really been talking about this soft process, how to institutionalize the Quad. And therefore, I would argue that building networks should be one of the key aspects. And this network building could be at the level of scholars, at the level of think tanks, at the level of universities. We need to actually bring a more people-to-people oriented contacts in the Indo-Pacific regions, and the Quad can actually take a lead into that. Quad countries can take lead into that in terms of institutionalizing the process. The other two critical point is to go for institutions or university which actually could talk about the liberal values, the democratic oriented values, and how to preserve the rules-based order. And I think we need an Indo-Pacific institution in the regions, either in terms of a defense university or maritime university in Indo-Pacific. And I think the Quad countries can take an initiative with regard to that. And besides that, I think we need to talk about critical cooperation in critical areas like renewable energy, marine ecology, cultural and social interaction. And I think India has a lot to contribute to the Quad. And I think with the Biden administration coming in US, we need to have a much more serious institutional oriented interactions among all of these four countries. One last point I would add before finishing is that I think we also need to draw lessons from China. Even though the China is the biggest motivating factor for all the Quad countries to stay united. And I think we need to also draw lessons from the Chinese foreign policy, how Chinese foreign policy has actually taken the advantage of institutionalize the groupings. For example, if we go back to 1996-97, China established Shanghai Five, and then China converted the Shanghai Five into Shanghai Cooperation Organizations. And they actually institutionalized the Shanghai Five process quite rapidly. And we need to really take lessons from that. There is one more lesson we need to learn is about the BRICS. You see today, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS groupings. They have actually institutionalized the BRICS proceedings quite fast. And they have today a bank called the New Development Bank. And I think in the Indo-Pacific regions, the Quad countries needs to talk about some of these issues, some of these lessons, which are right out there, and we need to draw lessons. And I think India has a lot to offer, and India would like to push the Quad formulation both on the hard and on the soft network building directions. I would stop here and welcome your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jagannath, for the very expansive view of how Quad process should unfold, especially on the soft cooperation. I think we can come back on that issue later, but many ideas you have. Thank you very much. So I want to move to Dr. Kei Koga from the Japanese perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind introduction, Nishida-san. I'd like to thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the Institute of South Asian Studies, ISAS, NUS, for letting me have the opportunity to exchange my views in this webinar. As introduced, I'm Kei Koga from the Nanyang Technological University. So I was tasked to discuss Japan's perspective on the institutionalization of Quad and its prospect, particularly focusing on whether the ongoing progress is substantial one or not. And since my presentation time is limited to the around 10 minutes, so let me first dive into my conclusion, which are threefold. The one is the institutionalization of Quad is strategically beneficial for Japan, particularly in shaping regional order in the Indo-Pacific. And Japan would likely keep investing its diplomatic resources on it in the long term. And second one is despite the current momentum of institutionalization, its process will have ebb and flow. So, it would not be surprising if the progress actually slows down in the future. The third one is Quad is not a strategic panacea for Japan. It helps shaping regional order, but it will be a long way for Quad to act like an ally and militarily ensure member states' vital interests, such as territorial sovereignty also. So let me elaborate each factor. The first, Quad is strategically beneficial for Japan. And in fact, Japan has invested its diplomatic resources in creating this framework for a long time. The Quad framework started from 2004, which was rather contingent because the four countries began to cooperate for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief on the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake. The early 2000s was the time when the United States and Japan were strengthening its strategic ties with India and Australia. So this framework showed its potential, and then many started to watch its development. In the late 2000s, Japan began to show its strategic vision to strengthen ties with democracies around the world, such as Foreign Ministers, the ASO, Archon of Freedom and Prosperity. And this idea was related to the counterterrorism because democratic process was considered to be one of the solutions to suppress a terrorist act. But the idea was also implicitly applied to China, and which was growing the influence in Asia at the time. And in this connection, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe attempted to institutionalize the Quad, but it was not realized because of the different threat perceptions existing among the four countries. The idea came back in 2012 when Abe regained the prime ministership and wrote his famous op-ed, Asia's Democratic Security Diamond, which envisions the enhancement of cooperation among the four countries, Japan, US, Australia, and India, while encouraging the United Kingdom and France to participate. And after Abe launched Japan's new strategic vision, Free and Open in the Pacific, the so-called FOIP, in 2016, he also put forward Quad as the core institutional framework, although not so explicitly. So broadly speaking, Japan's strategic objective in Quad are to maintain the existing international order, including the democratic principles, and also to check China's behavior. And as such, Japan has invested a lot of the, again, like diplomatic resources in realizing Quad, and Japan would not hesitate to further institutionalize it. So that said, and then this is going to be my second point, institutionalization of Quad will have ebb and flow. The momentum increases and decreases depending on the strategic environment that each Quad member faces. So we shouldn't overreact to these changes, and then this should be seen as a long-term project. In fact, it has been more than 15 years to get to this point, and this is because four countries do not always share the same concerns, and then China's relation with Quad member states entail both competition and cooperation, which makes their strategic calculation really, really complicated. So even if some states among Quad member attempts to balance against China, there are always others that attempt to improve the tie with China, or at least to mitigate the tensions between them. And this is very illustrated by Australia in 2008, when they became hesitant to institutionalize the Quad because of their relationship with China. Japan is not an exception, and Japan's posture towards China has shifted from tough stance to the softer one, a relatively softer one in the 2010s. Japan-China relation has worsened because of the Senkaku issues in 2010 and 2012, and China's maritime assertiveness in South China Sea exacerbated this trend. At the same time, the bilateral rivalry began to emerge as the China's infrastructure development with its own standard through the Belt and Road Initiative attracted regional states in the Indo-Pacific. So in order to deal with this China's increasing influence, Japan has expanded its strategic horizon by introducing the FOIP. But from 2017, the Abe administration somewhat took a different approach, although its diplomatic principles are not completely changed. The US posture towards China toughens. Japan began to open the window of opportunity for to China, and then try to cooperate with it. In June 2017, Abe made a speech that touched on the possibility to cooperate with China in infrastructure development in third countries under the condition that the infrastructure development would be transparent, economically viable and financially sound. So since then, Japan has actively sought on opportunity to discuss potential cooperation with China, and even under the current Suga administration, this trend continues. So Japan is obviously in favor of institutionalizing Quad, but its attempt is to avoid provoking China excessively. To be sure, this does not mean that Quad does not have a good future prospect. Institutionalization by itself sends a strong signal to China that a rules-based order should be maintained, and that the international law, norms, and principles should be respected. This institutionalization process gives a prospect that those are the major powers will enhance their strategic cooperation and strongly push back any infringement of the international order in the future. In this sense, the institutionalization itself will become a good diplomatic tool for Japan. So, and then my last point, the third point, the Quad will not be the strategic panacea to Japan. I mean, this was already said by the former presenters, but the member states' different threat perceptions in terms of the its degree and scope are reasonably there. And then, for example, it is not conceivable, at least for now, that the India and Australia would join with Japan and even the United States in times of crisis, say contingency in the East China Sea. Likewise, it would be legally, politically, and militarily very, very difficult for Japan to dispatch its self-defense force near India's disputed border when India faces military confrontation with China. And then again, like maybe the Quad can cooperate the unified diplomatic front to condemn any aggressions or violation of international law. And bilaterally, they have already concluded several the military agreements, such as AXA and also the intelligence sharing. But then if Quad member states want to make Quad like a treaty ally, it needs to make extra diplomatic efforts or legal and political efforts to nurture consensus domestically and internationally, which is quite challenging. So this is partly why Prime Minister Suga reaffirmed that the Quad would not become the Asian NATO in the near future. So also, even if 4 members agreed to further institutionalize Quad in that way, and this might not always be welcomed by regional actors, most notably ASEAN will be hesitant to support such an initiative because it will divide a region and marginalize ASEAN's role in the regional multilateralism. Japan also has always attempt to secure ASEAN's support, or at least ensure that ASEAN would not deny Japan's initiative. So ASEAN's kind of hesitation would likely shape Japan's decision in the future. So that's my 3 points. Now, just quickly going back to the original question, can we seize the opportunity to further institutionalize Quad in the near future? I think it is a matter of degree. The Quad ministerial dialogue has been already regulated, institutionalized, and then they may issue some joint statement about regional and global order in the future. Also, given that the new US administration's strategic focus entail the Indo-Pacific, whether or not the administration call it FOIP or the secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific, the trend is likely to be positive and continue. However, at the same time, Japan and the United States are facing the new wave of COVID-19, and the domestic issue will be their priority in the next few months. So it will be unlikely that we will see a big change unless there are certain external shocks, like the large naval confrontations and conflicts in the region. So basically, we can expect more gradual institutionalization of the Quad in the future. So I still have the other things I'd like to say about particularly the Quad Plus, but because of the time constraint, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kei, for the great presentation from the Japanese perspective. So we understand that in the military sense, there are some limitations for Japan to further cooperate in this region. But as you initially said, we started to have this process from this HADR cooperation. So there might be some other opportunities as well. I think the three speakers have talked each of the national perspectives very nicely and hinting some of the questions. One of the issue is the membership or the press issue that the Kei wants to discuss later on. And others, I think the Lavina and Jagannath also stressed that it is not just a military alignment, but there is a possibility for the softer side of cooperation, of the institutionalization. In fact, as I understand, the Australia, India, and Japan are forming the supply chain resilience initiative already. And also the US and Japan and Australia are making a commitment for the Indo-Pacific infrastructure development cooperation. So these soft issues, as the Jagan has been discussing, he was talking more on the cooperation in academic cooperation and making the sense of the Indo-Pacific identity by through those activities. How do you think about this softer side of cooperation? If you can elaborate a little bit more, Dr. Lee, it would be nice. Then I'm going to ask the Jagan and also the Kei-san.
Okay, thank you, Ippeita-san. When you talk about soft institutionalization, Jagannath was mentioned education, people to people, that kind of direct within the state type links. I almost think that when we refer to soft institutionalization, we're referring to anything that's not military. And to me, the economic side of the equation is not that soft. It is often said to me when we used to travel and we used to be able to go around the region, that one of the main problems with the American free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and the kind of vision that a lot of the Quad countries share is that it lacked an economic vision that was inviting and had substance for countries in the region. So particularly in regard to combating some of the worst aspects of the BRI, things like infrastructure development being used to effectively tie those countries to the Chinese economy. We mentioned infrastructure development and an infrastructure development fund by Australia, Japan, and the United States. I think that's very important, but the real problem is that our three countries don't have the level of funding that China is able to offer many countries. So when we talk about soft institutionalization, what I think is important for Quad countries to do more of is cooperation on standard setting. So we have the Blue Dot Network that was created, I think, in 2019. I think Japan led on the Isajima principles that were adopted by the G20. But those kinds of collective promotion and advocacy of standard setting when it comes to responsible infrastructure development, I think that's a very important and not so soft outcome for Quad countries. Now, in terms of other types of standard setting, I think there's a lot of scope for the Quad to do more in terms of common standards and approaches to the involvement of Chinese SOEs and Huawei in the development of 5G networks around the world, helping other countries to assess security risks, to advocate, to provide policy insights to other countries that might not have considered the security risks. They could also be doing more collaboration on and standard setting on things like artificial intelligence. And I quite like the idea of the British government, that idea of the D10 Club of Democracies getting together. That's about 5G, but also in terms of artificial intelligence, promoting standard setting, collective standard setting on how we should protect data collection, for example. perhaps somebody else might like to step in there on other forms of soft institutionalization.
Right. Thank you very much for your input, especially on the standard setting. I think it's really important to maintain this liberal international order and to uphold the value of the rules-based order at the sea as well. Jagannath, you have talked much about the specific aspects on the soft cooperation. Can you also elaborate this based on the Lavina's point of view? She was talking about the standard setting. How can those, efforts can better unify the Indo-Pacific, as a whole, to cooperate to have the secure and prosperous region?
What Lavina said, largely I agree with her. But I think one important background that we need to keep it in mind is that when we are talking about soft security or soft security networks among the Quad countries, we don't necessarily have to differentiate exclusively from the hard security networks. After all, it's a grouping of the 4 like-minded countries. So it has to be a complementary process. We might invest on the hard security in terms of building maritime consensus that we are already to some extent doing, like we invited Australia to come back to Malabar exercise, and now there is a maritime exercise is happening through the Malabar exercise, which is actually complementing the Quad process. So therefore, when we're talking about essentially the soft security network, it doesn't have to be separated from the hard security networks. After all, we are talking about this network building among the same 4 countries. So therefore, I think when we are talking about soft security networks, the biggest lesson we need to learn is how the BRI is actually cultivated. Of course, I am not really a supporter of the BRI process, the way it is being expanded all over the world. But look at the Chinese game plan. There are hard security elements and soft security elements involved in the BRI process. And therefore, we don't have to counter the BRI per se. I think building the consensus and building our competencies in the Indo-Pacific would obviously act as a counter process to the BRI that China is trying to enhance in the Indo-Pacific regions. So therefore, what we have to do in the Quad process is to bring enough dialogues, enough meetings at the official level, at the scholarly level, at the think tanks level, which could be a multi-layer dialogue process. And that would actually complement both the hard and security network in terms of institutionalizing the Quad process. The other aspect, which will be key to both the soft network networking process and the hard networking process within the Quad process, is to invest energy, invest time, and invest resources to kind of revitalize the trilateralisms which are already there. For example, the India, US, Australia trilateral, Australia, US and Japan trilateral, and India, Japan and Australia trilateral. And Lavina correctly mentioned about the Blue Dot Network. Blue Dot Network is essentially a kind of initiative of US, Japan and Australia trilateralism. India is considering positively to be a part of this process, but there is a flip side to it, because India is not really a developed economy the way US and Japan. It's not really a middle ranked or a developed economy which could actually contribute financial resources to the process. So therefore, I think India could support the process in terms of bringing human resource development to the infrastructure, to the connectivity that the BDN is actually talking about in terms of certifying it as a quality process. So all of these things are complementary to each other. We don't have to differentiate from one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are starting to see some of the comments already, but let me ask one more of the questions. I mean, adding to the soft security issue, Kei-san. Right. One of the issue is the membership. This is a time of the start in 2007 or 2013. This class issue is always a question, and it inherently relates to the Quad's identity as a democratic alignment. Now, we've been talking, I think each of the members talked about the press aspect as well. But how do you see we can move this forward, this institutional process, to have horizontal access to other partners? Traditionally, as you said, the ASEAN countries, they do not want to be brought into this debate, right? But recently, I think that we are seeing more increasing interest by European partners. For example, UK is going to send the aircraft carrier battle group next year or this year. The French Navy chief said, formerly said they want to participate in Quad maritime exercise, right? The EU has designated the security cooperation in Asia, and they have targeted India, Japan, Indonesia, Korea, Singapore, and Vietnam to cooperate with. And we are also having the issue of the Taiwan. The democratic, the regional stakeholder are very important, and having the more importance in this region. How do you see this plus issue to be considered?
All right. Thank you very much, Nishida-san. I think the membership is really important in this aspect, but at the same time, we have to be a little bit kind of flexible about the membership in terms of the Quad Plus. So what I'm thinking is just the like the Jagannath-san said, it should be kind of multi-layered institutional mechanism. So Quad could be the core, but then Quad is the one of the many kind of multilateral frameworks that exist in the Indo-Pacific. And then the in order to kind of facilitate that, in order to maintain the kind of momentum for the institutionalization of the Quad, I think the Quad needs to figure out the comparative advantage it could actually have. For example, it could be the coordination mechanism for the capacity building in the regional states, and also it could actually consider kind of standard setting, but then the coordinate their standard on the digital infrastructure and so on and so forth. So I think the Quad at first try to figure out it, and then I think the Quad Plus can be the kind of a really additional advantage. And the what I'm thinking about is the once the Quad can cooperate and then have certain kind of consensus, then like it could actually include the more members in it, and then the Quad Plus shouldn't be the one just form like the ADMM Plus. ASEAN the defense ministers meeting has the 18 countries, and then that's it, right? But then I think Quad Plus can be many forms. Quad plus the, for example, South Korea, and then also the other New Zealand, or the Quad plus the Sri Lanka or like other countries. I think there are several kind of forms that we can think about, and then I think the at that level, like it should be really informal, and then it could be the also the ad hoc, and then the if we could actually negotiate or if we hold a dialogue, and if we get to the consensus, we can actually push forward. And then this is actually the way to maintain or like facilitate rules-based order, because rules-based order at the end of the day needs the many regional states that agree with that order, right? And also the trying to create the order, should not be the top-down. It should be to some extent bottom-up too. So we need to actually gain the as much consensus as possible. And I believe some of the existing rules are pretty much agreeable, except for probably like the democracy. But then I think the other kind of digital standard, we could actually talk about it. So I think this is the kind of way we should actually create multi-layered the mechanism of the institutionalization in the Indo-Pacific. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Jagannath, you want to add something?
Yes, I think broadly I would agree with Kei-san's observation about the Quad Plus. I have, however, slightly modified views about the Quad Plus. I think we don't have to necessarily see Quad Plus as a formalized grouping or a kind of a extension of Quad process per se. I think the necessity of the Quad process is that it's a virtual understanding that is emerging, and Quad Plus is a process which is very much abstract, like the concept of Indo-Pacific. There is no unanimity about the Quad, about the Indo-Pacific when it comes to its geographical definitions. Each of the Quad countries, each of the major countries in the regions, they have their own definition of Indo-Pacific. So therefore, we don't necessarily have to see Quad Plus process as an extension of the Quad per se. But yes, I think all of the Quad countries can provide a kind of leadership, provide a kind of guidance to the Quad Plus process. And I truly agree with Kei-san that I think it doesn't have to be in a confined membership format. There will be differences of accepting many things when it comes to the ASEAN regions. There is a biggest dispute in the regions, that is the South China Sea, which will actually divide most of the ASEAN countries. And I would encourage you to have a look at our just released special issue on the Quad Plus, which is actually appeared in the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs. I edited this special issue, and a lot of scholars have actually written, and this is one of those comprehensive volume about Quad Plus. So my whole point here is that we don't have to necessarily see it as an extension of the Quad process. What we need to see that it is an abstract concept which is there. And just like the Quad process, when we talked about the Quad in 2004, about the tsunami incident, today we are talking about the Quad Plus on the backdrop of the Corona pandemic. So we need to retain this framework, no matter in how loose or in abstract format. We can bring like-minded countries to talk about greater governance issues, be it infrastructure issues, be it connectivity, be it human resource development, be it addressing the concerns of the smaller countries, or be in order to promote democratic regimes or strengthening their forte in the Indo-Pacific. And I think Quad Plus format has a contribution to make, and I think we should support that. And therefore, India, Japan, Australia, US, all the core mainstream countries in the Indo-Pacific, they have a role to play to take forward the Quad Plus process.
Thank you very much. How about Lavina, from your view?
I agree very much with both Kei and Jagannath that it can be very much driven from a bottom-up process, depending on the interests and objectives of the particular plus members that you're speaking about in an issue area. I think we also just have to remember, as with all forms of institutions, the wider the membership, the more stretched the resources, the more stretched the focus. And I would, I think it's a great thing that, say, in the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been a number of Quad Plus groupings speaking about economic coordination, health and security, all of the important issues with COVID-19. And that's an example of an ad hoc Quad Plus process. But I think we shouldn't forget what the Quad is about, and that its core purpose and the reason for existence is really about how China is behaving. And as we said earlier, I think Kei mentioned that really it will evolve organically according to the security environment. And we are in putting together the Quad countries are sending signals to China that the more China behaves in a way that undermines the security and the rules-based order in our region, the more it is pushing the Quad countries together to coordinate their military policies, to coordinate their deterrent capacities, to amplify their deterrent capacities and to work together. So that is a core aspect of the Quad, and we don't really want to dilute too far from the important issues and agenda of the Quad, which is really about countering the undermining of the rules-based order. That's my view.
Well, thank you very much, Lavina. And exactly at the point of the central issue of the China, there are some questions posed from the audience asking about the collective credibility of correcting or navigating China's behavior in this region. Some people are asking, about how those four countries going to work together to how is going to be the U.S. commitment in the region, and also how each of the country will respond to carry the burden of doing the business in this region. And relating to that, one of the person is asking, okay, India is not a former allied partner to the US, and it's not committed, formally committed. How is it going to be different from the way Japan or Australia commit to the region and uh, and 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 deal with China's behavior? Can Kei respond first to this question?
Thank you very much. So the first question is how to kind of maintain the U.S. commitment to the region and then Quad in the Indo-Pacific, and then they try to shape the China's behavior. I think the current Biden administration, now like it's inaugurated, I think, no, not yet, probably, but almost. The new administration is going to focus on the Indo-Pacific to some extent. So I think in terms of the diplomatic kind of behavior, the commitment will be there. I don't know how much resources the US could actually invest in the shaping the Indo-Pacific, the regional issues, but I think what the other allies and also the partners can do is if we agree the principles and also the norms of the international current international order, then obviously those kind of partners and allies should invest more in the shaping. So in that sense, they should actually cooperate in terms of the economic development, and also if the regional countries suffer from the lack of resource in the building their own capacity, then probably like Japan, Australia, and even India can actually help out. So in that sense, I think this is always the case, but the burden sharing in the more kind of the sophisticated manner should be put forward. I think that's the kind of one way to keep United States commitment sustainable, and then I think that could be appreciated by the United States too. And also the other thing is India is different. I think India is different, and India is not the former ally with the United States. But at the same time, again, like this kind of institutionalization of Quad helps, because I think although the substance-wise, I'm not too sure to what extent India could commit to its resources or regional order building in the Pacific in the future. But then one thing is that by institutionalizing the framework, those kind of four countries can have opportunity to talk to each other, and then even if India has the kind of lack of the commitment in the future, maybe we could actually the other three countries can persuade India not to go like a completely different way. And then this is, I think, the beauty of the institutionalization. I mean, institutionalization sometimes got reversed, but I don't think this kind of institutionalization, the four is not going to reverse. And then I think their commitment to the institutionalization is real. So even if their commitment fluctuate, the framework and the dialogue actually is sustainable. So I think like that's a really, really good way to keep the India in this Indo-Pacific manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Lavina, do you agree with the Kei's point of view? You actually talked in initial remark that one of the Australia's objective is to encourage India to take a greater role in the Indo-Pacific region?
Look, I think I've just noticed a really great question from one of our audience members, Dr. Wilkins, where he mentions the declassified US strategic framework for the Indo-Pacific. And he's asking, how would the United States evaluate Australian, Indian, and Japanese approaches to the Quad? Now, I think your question about India, I'm very heartened by what Jagannath has said about India's renewed, or I would say expanded commitment to the Quad as a result of its ongoing border dispute with China. And in my view, when I've been looking at this dispute over the last number of months, it seemed to me that there has been a reassessment in India about its approach to China, that previous attempts to reset relations, to placate China on the basis that if India were to do so, that China wouldn't press some buttons that India seeks to avoid. So things like supporting Pakistan or activating a border dispute or exercising influence over its neighbors, those kinds of things, which India is very sensitive about. I think India has realized that all of its attempts to placate China really had no impact whatsoever, and that China has moved into a phase of being quite expansionist as regards to its territorial claims. So the Quad therefore gives India more options and potentially a form of leverage that India can apply against China, just as China attempts to apply leverage against India. Now, when I think of India, when it comes to the Quad, people are the most skeptical about India, and that therefore they say the Quad can never work because India will never commit to the level of like an ally to the United States, as Australia and Japan are. I think that Japan, Australia, the United States are quite understanding of India's position, and bringing India into the Quad in and of itself is of benefit to the other three countries. If India can be a net security provider in the Indian Ocean, that adds a huge deal of strength to the Quad as a whole. So whether India is ever going to participate or defend Japan in the East China Sea is of no consequence, because it still benefits Japan that India is upholding the rules-based order in the Indian Ocean, and that amongst the four players, each of them takes responsibility for some aspect of that geography. And the force multiplication that occurs is largely about enhancing capabilities and enhancing the ability of each country individually and together in terms of their ability to preserve their sovereignty. And I liked a particular statement from the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, in his covering note to that declassified document, where he said, the strategy has been about seeking to ensure that our allies and partners can preserve and protect their sovereignty, rather than being forced to subordinate their freedom and sovereignty to a common destiny envisioned by the CCP. So when you look at a lot of the initiatives of the Quad, I think it is about enhancing the capacities of individual states to be able to exert their sovereignty and not be subjected to outside coercion by the CCP.
Thank you. Jagannath, do you want to have the responses from the India perspective?
Yes, on 2 points. One is from the India point, and the second was on the Biden coming to power. Now, on the India point, I do have a view about this, that there has been a lot of write-ups that has come that India is the weakest link in the Quad process because India is not an alliance partner of the US and the way Japan and Australia is. But I think that's not necessarily a drawback. I think we agreed at the beginning of this seminar, and I think all the Quad countries agreed that the national priorities and the preferences of looking at the regions would be different. And I don't think there will be a kind of conformity and agreement to this process. Second, I think not having an alliance partnership is also an advantage in some ways, because if we are becoming an alliance partner, then we are actually talking about a much more military oriented partnership here. We are not really talking about a much more liberal oriented grouping, which would actually could expand the scope of this grouping in terms of preserving rules based order and talking about democracy promotion, protecting maritime commons and other things. If we are really signing an alliance and becoming an alliance partner, then it would only mean that we have to agree on certain security and military oriented objectives. And I think that in a way would loosen the focus of the Quad. The Quad's focus, I mean, we might agree or disagree. Yes, it is much more maritime oriented, but within that maritime oriented focus, there are other objectives for the Quad countries. And therefore, India not being an alliance partner should not necessarily be seen as a drawback, as we discussed, because India does bring many other elements to the grouping. The second thing, I think, why India is not really, I would agree with the other two panelist colleague of mine, Kei and Lavina here. And I think we have to see why India is not an alliance partner or may not really commit to become an alliance partner. And I think here, the history comes as a backgrounder. None of the Quad countries have actually agreed to have a specific position on some of the key conflicting issues. For example, can the Quad countries really agree on India-China boundary dispute? Can they really support India's claim on the India-China boundary dispute? And I think that will be absolutely very difficult to agree on. Can all the Quad countries like Australia, Japan, India, and US agree on India's claim on the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir? And I think that will be, absolutely very difficult. Can all the Quad countries agree on South China Sea claim and on the Senkaku Island dispute claim, particularly on the Taiwan issue? And Taiwan issue is another critical element, and we should not forget the history of China-Taiwan, because it was the Chiang Kai-shek government which had actually come from mainland China to form the government in Taiwan. So Taiwan is having a very problematic position on India-China boundary issues. They have never supported India on India's claim on the India-China boundary dispute. So therefore, to have an agreement among the Quad countries on all the conflicting issues or disputed regions is going to be absolutely very difficult. And therefore, we cannot really, if we take history into account, we cannot really imagine a context where there will be an absolute agreement and India would join as an alliance partner. But what India is committing to the process is a stronger military and security-oriented partnership, and that's what we are seeing. With Australia, we signed the security management agreement, defense management agreement recently. With Japan, we signed the AXA. With US, we have gone to the another level in signing 3 or 4 fundamental agreements on the defense domain. So India is a virtual alliance partner, and given the foreign policy dynamics, it is having a multi-alignment strategy. It is focusing on a single oriented pointed alignment strategy of engaging with the Quad countries. And that should be seen as a positive development, because this is the change we are talking about India after the Galwan incident and after the pandemic has started. And that should be welcomed among the Quad countries. And very briefly about BDEN, and I think we should not really be reading too much whether there is a government change in US and the Democrats are coming to power. And I think the single important factor here, which should actually encourage all of us to draw optimism about the Quad process, about the Indo-Pacific narrative, no matter how much we are using or banking on the Indo-Pacific narrative, if we are talking about even the Asia-Pacific, the single most important factor that we should be encouraged about is that US has a critical stake in the regions. And US is in a much serious manner invested in the regions. It has more than 1,000 military stationing point all across the Indo-Pacific regions. It has its vital security interest in the regions. So no matter Biden coming or Trump's returning in the power, of course, Biden has now come to power, we won't say much change. It is only going to be a change in tactics, not a change in strategy per se. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been talking much about the India, but I saw the particular question directed to Australia's case as well. Can I just ask Lavina on this? I think this is for the Japanese participants. Okay, so the relationship between Australia and China is now at the bottom. How is Australia to get along with China and to stand up China at the same time? And is this institutionalization have any chance to make Australia's voice bigger to support its, the diplomatic standpoint?
Thank you for the question to the audience member. Unfortunately, I don't read Japanese, so I'm not sure of the name. Look, I think Australia, that these kinds of questions are asked almost every few days in the media. What are we going to do? What's the Australian government going to do to improve relations with China? I actually think the Australian government is taking a longer term view. It's resisting these calls to change course for the reasons that I presented earlier, that the kinds of things that China wants us to do effectively asks us to cede our sovereignty to China. The 14 grievances are largely about domestic issues that most countries, I think, would say are within our domestic prerogatives and are within our sovereign rights. So I don't see how many other countries would be able to accept the list of grievances and to change course on that basis. I think what the Australian government is attempting to do is effectively draw a line in the sand and say, these are the things that we hold dear. We hold our democratic character dearly. We want to protect domestic politics from foreign interference, from outside influence. We want to maintain our sovereign decision making. And that is the basis on which the relationship has to proceed. So it might seem to be a brave step to take, but I actually think that Australia has taken a bit of a leaf out of Prime Minister Abe's book, in that Japan went through a period of very turbulent relations with China, where Japan stood up for its maritime rights and its sovereignty. And over time, China was conditioned to accept that was the effective red lines of the relationship, that Japan would deal with China on a particular basis and would not back down. So I think the Australian government is taking a longer term view and is confident that it can withstand the pressure for now. And our major export earners, in terms of iron ore, for example, is a very large percentage of our exports to China. I think they're confident that China needs our iron ore exports and will not put forward some economic boycotts of iron ore because it would be too self-harming on China itself. Now, in terms of how is Australia going to get along with China and stand up to China at the same time, I do actually think its alliance with the United States, its good relations with Japan, which is probably our strongest relationship outside of the United States, and Australia will be fully committed to advancing the Quad and our Quad relationship as far as it can as a strategy to stand up to China and also get along with China, for China to respect those red lines, because we stand with a group, not alone.
Thank you very much. We have been talking about this individual ties. I think the Lavina earlier talked about, this Quad process is actually enhancing the capability of each of the countries to jointly maintain the order in this region. However, yet in Japanese case, as the Kei-san has suggested, we have legal and operational constraints. How is Japan going to respond to this kind of the all the questions we have been discussing? Okay, so we have so much capability, expectation given on this Quad process, institutionalization, whether or not it's formal, informal, or the the different layers. When it comes to the um, the media commitment, Japan, in addition to the resource constraints that the one of the panelists discussed earlier, we have the legal constraint and operational constraints. How is Japan going to contribute better to this increasing expectation?
Okay. May I? Yeah. So I think the easiest way to go around about the this kind of constraints is that the Japan could provide certain the capacity building programs to the, and also the kind of transfer defense technology transfer to the regional states. And this is kind of like what I call the kind of quasi offshore balancing. I'm not sure if that's going to be the kind of good word to say that, but then the because the Japan has a constraints in providing the its military force, or like that, I mean, they could actually go around to the Indian Ocean, which the Japan has done like the for quite a number of times. But then the I think the when it comes down to the kind of deterrence and then those kind of defense issues, maybe it would be better to just communicate and also the strengthen the defense ties through the defense technology transfer and also the capacity building. How the other countries are going to operationalize their military equipments and so on and so forth. I think in that way, the Japan has less constraints, and then the we could actually start providing more defense equipment to not like the kind of providing the defense equipment to increase the regional states' power projection capabilities, but they could actually at least the defend, and at least they could have the certain kind of the defense equipment to deter the local kind of conflicts and then skirmishes. So I think that's the kind the one way. Even if it's not like the defense, maybe the law enforcement capabilities that the Japan can actually give some kind of workshop to the coast guards in the regional countries, and also the provide the certain the cutters, the patrol ships to the regional countries, and then the deter the gray zone kind of the incursion the encroachment by the third parties. So I think these are the one way to go around. And then obviously, if the Japan could change its the constitution and also the legal kind of remove the legal constraint, probably it's going to be much easier for Japan to cooperate militarily effectively. But then I don't see it like in the near future. So probably like the in the meantime, probably like the capacity building program is the kind of one way to go around. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the panel of the audience is asking about more about this infrastructure cooperation side. So we can go back to the economic discussion. Lavina was talking that we don't have sufficient resources, yet I think there are the possibilities that the infrastructure development in the region will enhance our access capability or the more alignment with the host countries. How is the India is more likely to be receiving side of those aid on the port rehabilitations, the local infrastructure systems. How do you see those supply chain initiatives and also the development cooperation among those Quad countries to have a strategic impact in the regional stability. Jagannath, can you answer from your point of view?
Yeah, I think what we need to keep it in mind is that already we are talking about at the bilateral level a lot of cooperation when it comes to infrastructure and connectivity. For example, Japan is a key partner for India when it comes to investing in India's domestic context, and also Japan is the only major economy so far which have been allowed in India's northeastern part, where Japan has invested all across in all the domains, be it on the connectivity issues, on building road infrastructure, railway infrastructure, climate issues, irrigations, agriculture. So Japan is the only country which has actually been allowed to invest in Northeast India. So there is a confidence exists between India and Japan. The similar kind of confidence needs to be actually brought into the bilateral mode of India-US and India is Australia, bilateral engagement, and that will in a way complement the Quad process between India and US. If we try to understand, so far the relationship has been two-dimensional. One, on the trade and economic front. Second, on the security and military front. It has not really talked about those areas which falls into both the issues on the softer areas and also on the harder areas. So I think that is one area India needs to work with the US. When it comes to India and Australia, and I think there has been a gap in India-Australia relationship for last couple of decades, if not earlier. And the gap is that while Australia has looked much towards China, Australia has not really looked at its immediate neighborhood. That's actually India or the South Asian regions. And only recently, through its South Asia initiatives, Australia is looking at India. And from India's point of view, India has so far, only after Prime Minister Modi has come to power, the India-Australia relationship in some ways has been revitalized when Modi actually visited Australia after a long gap. Otherwise, India has actually overlooked Australia as a critical maritime partner, either in the Indo-Pacific regions or as a gateway to the Pacific regions. So we have not really, India has not really factored Australia that prominently. And therefore, in India-Australia relationship, there is a great level of improvement needed across all the domains, not only in the security and the defense area, but also on the key trade and economic ties. The India-Australia trade and economic ties is not really very impressive. We need to really talk about sectoral cooperations in the issue on the areas like connectivity and infrastructure. And therefore, when you take into account India's coastal management plan, India's maritime initiatives, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, we have cotton route projects, we have spice route projects, which are actually India's maritime domain initiatives, connectivity and trading initiatives, looking at the coastal states. And there, Australia can actually more intently engage with India, and India-Australia partnership on the issues of infrastructure and connectivity can be enhanced. And I think these are the areas, if we can work on, then obviously we'll be complementing to the Quad process and building a much more, synergized partnership in the Indo-Pacific region.
Well, thank you. I think that we are approaching the end of the time. But before we close, can I ask Lavina to reply to the Jagannath's point of view, and also to make some of the final words that you have in your mind?
Okay. Look, I'm in agreement with Jagannath. I think the Australia-India partnership is the weakest, or has been the weakest part of the Quad. But there's been great strides, I think, in the last year, where there was a virtual meeting between Modi and Prime Minister Morrison, where there was a number of initiatives announced. I think there could be some great synergies between Australia and India, particularly in terms of developing critical security, critical technologies, I should say, and supply chain resilience. And this would dovetail with India's own Make in India type of policy, where it's looking to become a manufacturing hub of Asia, maybe a competing manufacturing hub to China. And among the Quad countries, Japan already invests in India as a place of manufacturing, but the other Quad countries could do the same. And this, I think, could be a point of difference in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and also the development of 5G. So I would add to those initiatives to what Jagannath mentioned. I think just a closing point on the Quad is we started this discussion all about momentum and the momentum for the Quad. Where is it headed? I think that it really is in China's court where the Quad is headed and how deeply institutionalized it becomes. And I would say that since COVID-19, we've seen a doubling down of Chinese behavior that is actually driving the four countries even closer together. So if that continues, I would see some real great strides in institutionalization of the Quad coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kei-san, do you have the final word? Next?
Thank you very much. No, actually, the everything I wanted to say is pretty much said. So, I think only one thing I would like to add is just as the Lavina-san said, I think the Chinese behavior pushed the Quad to institutionalize its format. And then it's not going to be the reversible. And then this actual message is really, really important in order to maintain the stability and peace in the Pacific. So I hope like we are not going to kind of institutionalize this Quad like in the military sense, like further, because that means we could actually maintain peace. But like, when it comes to shops, maybe like we need to actually think in that way. So I think like this is a really good device to maintain in the Pacific peace and stability. And then I think there are many kind of hopes in the next administration in the United States, and then there's gonna be more coming. I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagannath.
Yes, I think what we are agreeing here is that there is a synergy already has emerged among the Quad countries, and this synergy needs to be expanded further in terms of giving it a direction to institutionalize the process. The differences are there, and the differences bound to be there because it is linked with the national priorities of the countries. And this national priorities will be the differentiating factor, but that should not be the dividing factor. That should not really deconstruct the Quad formulations. Quad formulation is here to stay, and I think there is a increasing commitment from all the countries in the Quad process, particularly after the pandemic and after the Galwan incident that India had to face with China, and particularly taking into account China's maritime activities during the pandemic. And I think Quad process is here to stay, and we need to seriously think about how to take it a direction, give it a direction in terms of institutionalizing it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your comments. Well, thank you very much all the panelists and the audiences to participate in this second SPF ISAS panel discussion on institutionalization of the Quad. I think we had learned so much from each of the perspectives, and let us hope that the new Biden administration will keep the soul of this Quad initiative, no matter how difficult that could be. And let us hope that the intellectual engagement to continue as well, as Jagannath has suggested. I think it is important, even if we have this COVID problem, we keep on discussing on those possibilities and and chances, so that to have in the future, in the long term, it can be settled down in the political process. So again, I really congratulate all three speakers for the contribution and the discussions, and also the participation from the audiences. I'm sorry that I couldn't pick up all the questions, but then I think we have discussed the essence. The more I think we can discuss in our third ISAS SPF panel discussion, which is scheduled in the late February, and I will keep you guys posted. Okay, so with this, I would like to close this panel discussion of the SPF ISAS, and hope we keep on our discussion in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Goodbye.